When you hear that trumpet, you know it's the Resistance Hour with Dr. Larry and Tom. Dr. Larry will not be joining us, unfortunately. He has a broken ankle. He's on his way to rehab. So he was not able to join us, but we wish for a quick recovery as quickly as possible. And hopefully next week he'll be back here. George Landreth is going to be with us for about 30 minutes. And then the last 30 minutes of the show, I've got several comments or questions that people have asked. And so we're going to go through some of these comments. Like we had one individual basically saying, you're concerned about the border. Another one, I love this, how to unscrew our country. Only the word that rhymes with duck was the word that she used. How to unduck our country.
Okay. Well, it's a family show, so we want to clean that up.
It's a family show, so we have to do that. All right. Now, on the Donaldson Files, we were talking about a lot of different subject matters, and so I want to kind of brief, but let's just start talking about where the right is today. And I think it's a fascination. To me, you and I both were in agreement, in 2015, 2016, we had our doubts about Donald Trump. And I list those in my book, what many of us had. And what we found is that once he became president, he basically, in many ways, ruled as a Reaganite. And, when it came to the economy, regulations, when it came to, tax issues, and certainly there was a populist side of it, but even with the trade side of the equation, which, he was a big protectionist, but the one trade agreement that he had was essentially, he just basically rewrote NAFTA and just, tinkered with it enough to get Sherwood Brown of Ohio to vote for it. But certainly, he didn't end NAFTA at all, but kept it, almost like 90%. And
even his protectionism seemed to be really to push hard on China to stop cheating and doing the things they were doing. So you could argue that his goal was to get us into a world where we have free trade, but some people you have to push. And so he was pushing.
Well, I mean, the thing with China, it's an interesting aspect with China because it's the one aspect that you can make a good argument that it took an edge off his recovery. Because we never really got to like 3% growth. Now we did see significant unemployment, and certainly many of the programs he had was beneficial, in particular to people at the bottom, people in the middle class. But I always kind of view China as not so much trade protectionism as much as we have to send a message that you can't do what you're doing.
Right.
And there was always that fear. I don't think anybody really came out and said, but in the back of my mind, I was thinking to myself, was this possibility what we're dealing with is economic warfare, or at least weakening and the Chinese economy and trying to get American business to come back home?
Yeah. Well, I think that at least that's how I kind of interpreted it, because what I noticed was he didn't seem that interested in it being permanent. He was hoping to essentially jar things loose a little bit. It's but who knows? I mean, I guess if he'd got another 4 years, we'd have a better sense of that. Yeah. But I think he's a businessman and he understands the value of trade. And it looked to me like he was trying to promote trade, but he understood that trading with China had to be done in a method that was actually free trade, not just
at least beneficial to us.
It needs
supposed to be a one-way street.
Right. Trade can't be a one-way street. And that's the whole point of trade, is that it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Like when I go buy a car, the reason I go buy a car is because I need one. And the reason why they sell me a car is because they want cash. So we make a trade and we're both better off at the end of it.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, to me, there was the populist side of the equation. Mm-hmm. There was the anti-establishment type of equation. But conservatives always been in the last several decades that anti, because really, I mean, they may be a conservative establishment, but we're not. I wouldn't view us as part of the political class, the leadership class. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
you go on
we're
the
usually on the
academic side of the
outside.
equation, conservatism, you'd be lucky to find a conservative at a lot of major universities, especially in the social science. You look at the media class, well, other than Fox, where are your conservatives? I mean, you'd be hard pressed. You look, even the scientific class in a way was more dominated by the left than the right. So, I mean, so there's always an aspect of this anti-establishment side of the equation that Trump appealed to. That's still there. But I think it's kind of one of those things where who are we as a movement? And I still think that that's a question we're still trying to banter around. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there that is true. I think that and populism is often with some people is a dirty word. Um, I think that there's an element of populism that makes sense to me, which means you're trying to make sure that the government works for people and for the populace in general. If it's just kind of nothing but populism, then it as often kind of becomes something that you fear is where you're just trying to manipulate the people to support you and work them up into a frenzy. At least that's the way I think of it when you think of it as a dirty word. It's these kind of
Yeah.
insincere politicians who are essentially using people's emotions against them. But I don't think it has to be that. I think that government has to work for people. Government has to, the whole concept, for example, of our founders, they wanted to create a government that worked, and they tried to learn from the experiences they'd had with the crown, and then they tried to make sure the bad things they didn't like didn't happen again. And the things they did like, they wanted to make sure they got more of that, maximize the positive and get rid of as much of the negative as you can. And so on some level, I would argue that telling people they can worship as they please, that they can think as they please, you could argue that's populist. And but I don't think it actually is. I think it's just you believe in freedom. You believe that people have the right to enjoy freedom and prosperity. I don't think that necessarily makes you a populist, at least as it's commonly used.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the other aspect, populism itself has always been more associated with the left than the right.
Yeah.
Well,
because it's usually about using the power of government to yeah. And since that's not really our orientation, but you could argue that Ronald Reagan was being populist theoretically when he talked to the masses about the need to get government off their back so they could be successful in life.
Well, here's the thing. It's interesting because the one thing that comes into play is this. In the Reagan era, by 1980, not only did you have inflation stealing from the average American, double digits, but you also had a tax system that, I mean, you got to remember, our top tax rate then was 70%.
Yeah.
And so you saw people in tax rates that literally the rich was paying, to a generation earlier.
Yeah.
So the middle class was being bumped as they moved up the economic ladder. Mm-hmm. They were being bumped in a higher tax bracket. And so it was a populist idea to reduce those marginal rates because everybody benefited from it.
Yeah.
From that. Today, a lot of Americans, your number one tax, if you're middle class, is Social Security and Medicare. It's not going to be the income tax. But you do have state income tax, you got sales tax, you got excess tax, and Social Security tax, which is approximately what? Well, it's actually, when you combine the two, Medicare, so it's 15.4, even though you have that fiction where
you think you're only paying half of it.
You're only paying
you're
half
actually
of it.
paying both halves.
Yeah, both
because
halves. Yeah,
let's
exactly.
be honest, the economics of that is, if you think your employer's paying that, then you think he's a charity.
Yeah.
Because he hires you knowing what the rules are, and he's got to determine that you're going to be able to cover the costs associated with your employment, which would be your salary, your benefits, all taxes attributed to it, including the part that he pays. So what does that mean? Your labors, your value to the employer, pay that taxes.
Yeah.
You just
So
don't know it.
yeah, just don't know it. But I mean, the point will be is that it's a totally different world today, and so you have to look at it in a totally different package. So to me, you know, one of the things that looking at, let's say, when I guess the best way to say it is that when you look at taxes today, and you look at things like uh, family, anything associated with the help, help raise the family, tax breaks in that regard are, would be considered a populist movement. By you're actually doing that, but that's certainly when you look at the Trump proposal, that's what he did, and certainly Biden tried to do the same thing from the left side of the equation.
Yeah.
But
Well, there are
it's
people who argue that, like, parents being more involved in their children's education instead of being
sure.
locked out, that's quote populist.
Well, that's true. That's another thing. But the other aspect to populism, because here's the interesting thing to me. What I felt in the Virginia election, you were there at ground zero. But my first impression was when I listened to Terry McAuliffe's defense of his statement, in his original statement. He was in fact saying, parents don't have a right to be part of, don't have a right. And as far as the education of the children, they belong to the state. I mean, that's about as blunt as you can put it.
Yeah.
But he didn't view children belonging to parents when it comes to education. They belong to the state.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a very radical, socialist idea in a way.
Yeah.
And, and the populist side of the equation. No, we want our ability to do, to have a say in what gets taught to our children in education.
And I agree with you that it was radical, but I would say that only if it's in terms of the idea itself. If radicalness is determined by how widely held the view is, that's actually the predominant view in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I mean, because you saw everyone rally around him. Nobody, show me the single person in Congress or in elected officials anywhere who said, how dare he say that? He was wrong to say that.
Yeah.
They all said he was right.
Yeah, he was right.
Yeah.
The only complaint that
that's
they have
what's stunning to me is we've gotten that radical an idea is now the majority position in one of our parties.
Yeah. Well, the thing to me, I think the thing that got Democrats more mad wasn't the fact that they disagreed with him, is the fact you're not allowed to say those things loudly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, why would you say that? I thought we had an agreement. We wouldn't talk about that.
Like that. Yeah.
It's our secret. Yeah.
But yeah. And no, it's one of those things you look, I mean, like I say, I just think to this day, I mean, I always thought to myself, but what is populism? And certainly when you looked at Trump populism, that's one example, education. And I think, quite frankly, there's this aspect of the political class, is pretty much dominated by the left in the society today. And, giving them the middle finger is the populist thing to do, I guess. But that's a reality, is that we live in a world in which the political class pretty much disdain the very people that they rule. They disdain the working man or the working woman. If you go to just follow the Canada, the truck in Canada. I mean, these were just hardworking people saying, look, we want to be able to do our job. Just let us do our job. Yeah, some of us got vaccinated, but let's not make this a condition of everything. Let us do our job and make a living. And the response of the government was, if you don't do what we tell you, we're not going to allow you to do a living.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you said, I think one of the problems you have with big government is that it really does see itself as smarter than we are. I would argue that the whole concept of big government is to say, we can spend your money better than you can. We can raise your children better than you can. We can run your businesses better than you can. We can basically do everything better than you. So we need you to sit down and shut up and let us run your life. and you will see how awesome things will be with us in charge and you just kind of letting us take the wheel.
All right, this is Tom Donaldson, Donaldson Files here on the Batchelor News Radio Network. You listen to this show every day, 1 and 7 p.m. on thebatchelornews.airtime.pro.
Since Buffalo Wild Wings is always open late, here are a few things you'll enjoy. Buzzer beaters, wings in 21 signature sauces and seasonings, and great deals on food and beer. Grab select domestic draft beer starting at $4. $4 shareables like street tacos, fried pickles, chili queso dip, mozzarella sticks, and roasted garlic mushrooms, and deals on select liquor and house cocktails. Phew, that's a mouthful. Catch all of the late night action. Buffalo Wild Wings. Wings, beer, sports. Offers and participation vary. Please drink responsibly. Void where prohibited.
This is Tom Donaldson, Donaldson Files here on the Batchelor News Radio Network. We're going to have George is going to be with us for about another, I would say, 10, 15 minutes. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, you can get this book, America the Abyss, Will America Survive, at your local bookstore, or you can get it at barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, libertyhillpublishingpress.com, which is associated with Salem Media. And again, like I say, batchelornews.airtime.pro. You can listen to the show every day at 1 and 7 p.m. every day. All right. Well, like I said, I mean, this to me it's kind of let me ask you this question. When you look at conservatism today, what do you see?
Well, it's always easy to see things that could be better in terms of, I mean, you know, they're not the majority in the Senate, they're not the majority in the House, and that's frustrating. But at the same time, like I was having lunch with some friends and we were talking about who might run in 2024. And what was interesting was there were a lot of possibilities for the Republicans, everybody from the obvious of Donald Trump to, you know, Ron DeSantis to Kristi Noem to Tim Scott to Tom Cotton. And there was this long list, and that was only like the first 3 or 4. The reality was there was like another dozen that people were naming. And I thought to myself, well, they're all plausible. You know, I mean, you know, they weren't like insane. And then the same question came out, well, who would run in 2024?
Yeah.
And then the question was, well, maybe Joe Biden, but that seems unlikely and kind of laughable. And then Kamala Harris, probably not. Her polling numbers are even lower. And then the question was, well, then who? And people had a hard time coming up with credible candidates or people you might recognize, which told me they don't have a bench.
Yeah. Well, you know, here's the thing to me.
So I don't think we're not that bad of shape, but I think it's easy to sometimes be critical and say, you know, oh, we have all these problems.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, here's the thing. To me, my view of Joe Biden, if he's breathing, they're going to run him. It's like a weekend of Bernie for 4 more years. Yeah. I mean, that's just my view.
I think you're probably right, but I think, but I'm not sure it's politically smart because I think he will have so devalued the brand, both of the Democratic Party in general, but specifically his brand. I mean, nobody's going to buy the idea that he's this steady hand on foreign policy, that he's the uniter. I mean, that was always stupid, but that's the story they told us, right? I mean, like an example, how do they believe the guy who gave us the verb to bork, which is to vilify, you know, the guy who was the chairman also, he was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee when the borking took place. He was also the chairman of the committee for the high-tech lynching of Clarence Thomas. And then when he's the vice president, he's telling a group of an audience of predominantly black people that the Republicans wanted to put them all back in chains in 2012. Mm-hmm. So this is the uniter. This is the guy who seeks. Yeah. I mean, and I remember when I thought to myself, this is a lie so stupid nobody could possibly believe it.
But they do.
But guess what?
The problem you run into is always in the case of Donald Trump. You have that contrast because you know, Trump made no premise of being a uniter. He basically
that's a fair point. I mean, the funny thing was they argued that a guy that's clearly even less uniting than Donald Trump, it was the uniter.
Yeah.
It's just that he's not as he doesn't do it on a daily basis on Twitter. But in a political battle and a political brawl, he's the guy who'll kick you in the groin and kick you while you're down and do everything he can. Partisanship, there's no rules.
Yeah.
He follows
Well,
the Chinese rule of war.
Well, so my view, like I said, my view is going to be he will run if he's breathing. I mean, that's my view is if he's breathing, he's running. Now the question is
probably right. And if that's the case, then if that's the case, then the Republicans almost assuredly will win in 2024.
Maybe. I'm not going to say that.
I just think he's done so much damage to his own
damage, but never say never. But I will say this also. Kamala Harris will not be the VP under those circumstances.
Yeah, she's not been. I think they had higher hopes.
Yeah,
for what she'd be able to do. I don't know why they did, because if you look at her political history, that was as reasonable as expecting him to be a uniter, but maybe even less reasonable. But it'll be interesting to see who they pick, because it'll be kind of an admission that they screwed up the first time, because it's really hard.
Well, yeah, but I'll tell you what,
they can give her some really plum position somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, my view is going to be is that as a possible president, a lot of people don't see her that way. And if you're going to run a Joe Biden one more time, you need somebody credible at the second spot, knowing full well, he probably wouldn't, the chances of, there's a considerable chance that he would not make it through the second term in whatever way you want to say it. I hate to be put that blunt that way, but
no, I think you're right. I mean, I just wonder if he can make it to this term.
Yeah, I think if he's breathing, he's gonna run. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't buy into that. They'll say eventually, but the thing is, you're right. He's damaged the brand enough that even when you look at polls with Democrats, he doesn't have 50% of support in any primaries.
Yeah, in fact, what's interesting is generally speaking, a sitting president, if you ask who their front runner is, the answer is always the sitting president within his own party. And yet that's not the case for him. He doesn't even have the, he's not over 50%. When you ask Democrats, who would you like to be the president nominee in 2024? He can't, it's like, that's a bad.
I mean, basically, I'll see somebody like Michelle Obama get far more than any other actual Democrat.
Because I think even Jimmy Carter was preferred as the nominee for his own party in 1980.
Yeah.
And he was about as weak an incumbent as we've had in a long, long, long time.
Yeah. So I know it's going to be interesting. Like I said, I don't see, somewhere along the line, if he runs, Kamala Harris doesn't, and I think she would have a very difficult time. Depends where we are in the administration. If we're still in a bad inflationary cycle, and you got some foreign policy debacles, which is a distinct possibility, and the border still totally chaotic, and it's going to be very difficult for Kamala to even be able, as a VP, run under those circumstances.
Right. Because I think her numbers are even lower than his, which means he's held in as low a regard as people have for him. They have even lower regard for her. Yeah. And,
but here's the other thing to me, the problem that I kind of look at is that, when I look at, again, and go back to the GOP and the Republican side, I know Trump wants to run. I have people tell me he's going to run. He's already running. He's pretty much going, I mean, the only thing he's really stated, something's wrong with my health. But I'm not as convinced as others that, I'm like Larry and I both had this conversation. We were both ambivalent in the sense that, do we want to go through, is he the right guy for 2024?
Well, I think another question is beyond 2024, because I think let's just kind of like role play this just briefly, which is he runs. I think he would win. He could probably beat Biden pretty easily at this point. And then the question is what does he do in the next 4 years? I think he does a lot like we did in the first 4 years, which is he does a reasonably good job of governing, but does a pretty poor job of managing the kind of communication sides of things. And he will re-alienate many of the people that came back into the fold because they got tired of $5 gallon gas and other problems and empty store shelves. And so I think that if he wins in 2024, we don't win in 2028.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point.
Maybe we should pick somebody who can win in 2024 and then win in 2028. And build a movement as opposed to just get a loyal following for himself.
Well, I think that's part of me, because I look at it. Here's the thing. There are 3 or 4 things I like. Number one, he's going to be 78 years old. And I don't care how healthy he appears to be. At 78, I think a lot of people are going to be saying, do we want to run another 78-year-old guy? I don't know. I just don't think that. I think the age factor comes into play with some voters. The other aspect that comes into play here is that I guarantee you, between various state attorney generals like the lady in New York, you have a Department of Justice, Biden Department of Justice, and darn well that they are going to find any way possible to throw his butt in jail, even if it's for jaywalking. They do it and we're going to be going through this every day of a campaign. Oh, we got the goods on Donald Trump.
Yeah, we've seen this before, right?
Yeah, we've seen it before. But the thing is,
it'll just be a new topic.
Yeah, but the reality is this: we're going to be facing this. I look at the numbers, and there's been like 36 polls since November to the president, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And basically, you're looking at a 44 to 42%. It's not like he's that dominant. He still hasn't captured those, what I call suburbanites that he's alienated. And even against Kamala Harris, he's like 47. And I think there was a very interesting, Andrew Malcolm of Red State said, are we seeing a ceiling with this guy? If you're at 47, you're not going to win too many presidency unless you have a strong third party, which you had in 2016, where you had a libertarian that basically got 3 or 4% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have that. And I just also think that, to me, and this goes along with Pence, the one aspect, you look at Trump and you look at the pandemic, and the one thing is he had it in his power to pick the people to run the effort. And he had the power to fire them if they weren't doing what he wanted to do. And I still think to this day, both Mike Pence and Donald Trump have said, okay, why did you keep Tony Fauci and Debbie Birx around as long as you did when they were undermining your administration and even your policies? And they were encouraging Democratic states to continue the lockdown and continue the economic and the economic downfall as a result of that. That's on you. And you can compare that to Ron DeSantis, who didn't do that, or even a Brian Kemp of Georgia, who basically opened up the his state even before Ron DeSantis. So these are questions that these two have to answer. And I just think, quite frankly, I'm not sure they can, what's their answer going to be? Because what lessons have they learned?
Yeah, that's a fair point. That they may not be able to give us a good answer for that. And, that's a fair question.
Yeah, because the reality is, this is the one area of government he controlled.
Right.
This was his committee.
Yeah.
And when it became self-evident to me anyway, and it certainly had to be self-evident to him, that what they were telling him to do was not working, it was doing more damage than doing good. There's a point somewhere where, it's not like the media is going to be on your side anyway, one way or the other. So, and you still got the downfall from that, because you still have people who are convinced, that they need to be face masked up and, triple boosted or whatever. And we need, our airline, our airports to be full of mask mandates. Mask mandates. I don't know. I mean, the damage has been done. Tell you what, we're going to take a quick break here. I'm not sure how much more you can hang on.
It looks like I've got to run because
Okay.
unfortunately I didn't know that Larry was going to break his leg.
Yeah.
If I
I'll tell you what.
knew,
Yeah. Well, like I said, well, thank you very much for being on the show, ladies and gentlemen. Stick around. What I'm going to do, I've got some issues that coming from that people have sent in to us. So we're going to kind of talk about them, talk about a few odds and ends as well. So stick around. Tom Donaldson Files here. Oh, pardon me, Tom Donaldson on the Resistance Hour here on the Batchelor News Radio Network. And thank you, George, for joining us.
my pleasure.
Since Buffalo Wild Wings is always open late, here are a few things you'll enjoy. Buzzer beaters, wings in 21 signature sauces and seasonings, and great deals on food and beer. Grab select domestic draft beer starting at $4. $4 shareables like street tacos, fried pickles, chili queso dip, mozzarella sticks, and roasted garlic mushrooms, and deals on select liquor and house cocktails. Phew, that's a mouthful. Catch all of the late night action. Buffalo Wild Wings, wings, beer, sports. Offers and participation vary. Please drink responsibly. Void where prohibited.
Required listening with Amazon Music.
Dad music again?
The greatest guitarist of all time.
Wait, who?
Alexa, add this song to a new playlist.
Sure, what's the new playlist name?
Jack's Intro to Classic Rock.
Adding Stepping Stone by Jimi Hendrix to Jack's Intro to Classic Rock playlist.
Amazon Music, the simplest way to listen to the music you and soon he will love. New customers start your 30-day free trial at amazonmusic.com. Renews automatically, cancel anytime.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Donaldson Files here on the Batchelor News Radio Network. And what we're going to do here for the second half of the show is, like I say, Dr. Larry's got a broken ankle. So he is basically was in the hospital. He's on his way to rehab. But there were some things that people sent to me that, that I thought I would try to answer. Here. And so we're going to do exactly that. We're going to, look at some of these things, some of these questions that have been said and done. And I thought to myself, okay. And the first, question was, how do we unduck the country? I thought that was an interesting question. Only the word was not duck, but the word that rhymes with duck and so but the question comes into play. It's a good, interesting question to ask in this regard, because I think a lot of people are definitely scared of what they see. And I think they don't look at their political class today or their leadership class today as being able to solve these issues, or they are part of the problem. They feel like, and so the question comes into play. Well, it's a good question. And maybe the first way I would look at it is get involved with your local community. Get involved. If you got children in school, get involved with your children's education. Get involved in the political process. It's not perfect, but you can elect school board members. Who you can elect local, city council. You can elect your state representative. These are the people most closest to you. And these are the people most responsive to you. So the question would come into, so that's, those is, one of the things you can do. I think get yourself educated and understand what's at risk, what's not at risk, and what is risk. And ask questions. Go to, board, county board meetings, county meetings, and your local city meetings, and go to them. If you got an issue, go there. Voice your opinion. Get involved in this process, whether it is in your school education, your children's education, whether it is, politics at the local level. And in fact, I'll tell you an interesting story. In Virginia, Ned Ryan of American Majority was one of those people who basically went out and trained people to be poll watchers, to be election officials, election officials, and do these things, door-to-door type of campaigning. And in the state of Virginia, it did work. The one thing Republicans learned from the 2020 election is that you guys stay on top of the electoral process, pure and simple. And so the Republican Party was prepared. They had people trained to be poll watchers, to become election officials, to ensure the election was fair. The other aspect is that you had attorneys who knew the lessons of and was already ready to fight anything that they saw. And a good example is in Northern Virginia, in Fairfax County, if you did not wear a mask to the ballot, they would not let you vote. Because they'll say, well, in this building, you have to wear a mask. But the reality was the state law itself stated you could not deny somebody to vote, even if they weren't wearing a mask. It was not a requirement. And so the attorneys immediately got on the board to the state election board and said, look, this is happening. We got these people. Here's where it's happening. And within an hour, the state board went to the Fairfax County and said, you can't do that. You can't do that. And and this saved a lot of votes where people, instead of being denied or being harassed at voting, they were allowed to vote. So those are those are the things that one can do. I think the other thing is be informed of the issue. Be informed. Let your local representative know how you feel. The other side's doing it. You need to do it yourself. And I guess the last thing is elect good people. There are good people out there running. And elect good people who will stand up for you, stand up to the swamp, stand up to the leadership class, and do the right thing. So that would be number one. Now, okay, number two, voter fraud and voter preference. Now, I'm going to say something somewhat controversial in this sense. I'm not going to tell you that Donald Trump really won the election because I don't have that kind of evidence to say. I myself have done enough research in this for years. I've done 2 major reports for the America's Majority Foundation. So I've done that. And so I have a pretty good idea of the pervasiveness of voter fraud and voter irregularities. And I will say this, it's far more prevalent than what you read in the media. It does exist. It does happen. But the question is by how much? That's a good question. And that answer, I don't know. But I'm going to give you some data here and put it in this way. Number one, voterreference.com. It basically is kind of an interesting website worth looking into because basically they give you, the latest updated people voting, who's eligible to vote, who's not eligible to vote, and you can actually catch people if they're if they're eligible in 2 different states. That's a no-no, and you can that would actually show up in the records. But they found something like 600 up to the point they've looked at now 22 states. And they have something like 680,000 more votes than voters. Now, understand from a numerical, what this means is 12 represents 12, 11% of the total margin that either Trump or Biden won those states. These are all not just Democrat but Republican states. I do know that in the 10 states that Joe Biden won, including the District of Columbia, it was basically about 10% of the margin of victory in those states. So basically, you cannot make the argument that Joe Biden, that there was enough votes stolen that or enough excessive votes to turn the table. You're still looking at 90% of the votes out there. Now, you also have the issue of non-citizens voting And there have been numerous studies. Myself, for example, we found, anywhere between 0.2 to about 1.6% of voters who told our pollsters in 2014, 2018, they weren't citizens. This was also a study done by a Professor Richmond out of Old Dominion. He looked at 2008, 2010, 2012 elections and found similar numbers than what we found. But it's also hard to sit back and argue, but the question is, was that enough? And certainly in my own case, when I looked at many of these states that we were involved in, plus national polls, plus our numerous national polls, we didn't necessarily see any incident where an election would be turned, but we saw that, but we did make the conclusion that Republicans got a lot more, that Democrats probably got more votes than what they deserve, and Republicans got less than what they deserve, but not enough to attain the margin. Now, I did take some of that data and data produced with Old Dominion and myself and looked at a series of numbers, if it was this percent versus this percent of non-citizen, combine that with the excessive votes found by voter reference, I will say I'm 95% plus, almost 95 to 100% plus that Joe Biden won the election. But I'm also definitely certain that so far we've seen an average of 30,000 votes per state excessively voted. I mean, you got 680,000 more votes to voters in the states so far looked at. And by the time you finish, we'll be looking at 1.5 million votes. That's a lot of votes out there excessively. There was even one state where you had 3,000 less votes than voters. That means 3,000 votes didn't even get counted in that state. That was the state of Wisconsin. The only state that I can think of that you can sit back and say that the numbers counted pretty much matched the actual votes was the state of North Carolina. You had something like 42 more votes than voters. Well, that's some rounding error. But that's about the only state. Most of the states had some significant numbers. There are some states with 6 figures, some states with 5 figures. So we're not talking small numbers here. We're talking, again, an average of 30,000 votes per state. But understand, it was not 30,000 votes. For example, in the state of Georgia, you had 3,000 votes, excessive votes, so I call excessive votes. And that was by, and remember, Joe Biden won by a margin of about 12,000. I think Nevada was like, Joe Biden's margin was 30,000, and there was 8,000 excessive votes. Again, not enough to turn the election, but enough to sit back and say, maybe in the future. And we also had the aspect of Zuckerbucks. Now, that's basically what it is. Mark Zucker spent about $500 million with the idea of, quote unquote, nonprofit. We're going to help people count ballots and we're going to help people due to the pandemic. The reality was this was turned into a get out the vote type of campaign in Democratic areas. And most of the money, about 90%, went to Democratic areas. And there was, in the state of Wisconsin, there was a special investigator who has come to the conclusion that it may have mattered in Wisconsin, was a factor in Wisconsin that maybe Joe Biden did win that state. There was no doubt that there were members of Zucker's group that essentially took over election boards in Democratic areas. And so, in effect, $500 million properly positioned in the right way did make a significant difference in helping Democrats get extra votes. Now, whether or not, again, I'm not going to say that it was the deciding factor, because I think there are other factors as well, which I will go into after this break. This is Tom Donaldson, Donaldson Files here on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Required listening with Amazon Music.
Dad music again?
The greatest guitarist of all time.
Wait, who?
Alexa, add this song to a new playlist.
Sure, what's the new playlist name?
Jack's Intro to Classic Rock.
Adding Stepping Stone by Jimi Hendrix to Jack's Intro to Classic Rock playlist.
Amazon Music, the simplest way to listen to the music you and soon he will love. New customers start your 30-day free trial at amazonmusic.com. Renews automatically, cancel anytime.
Since Buffalo Wild Wings is always open late, here are a few things you'll enjoy. Buzzer beaters, wings in 21 signature sauces and seasonings, and great deals on food and beer. Grab select domestic draft beers starting at $4. $4 shareables like street tacos, fried pickles, chili queso dip, mozzarella sticks, and roasted garlic mushrooms, and deals on select liquor and house cocktails. Phew, that's a mouthful. Catch all of the late night action. Buffalo Wild Wings. Wings, beer, sports. Offers and participation vary. Please drink responsibly. Void where prohibited.
Welcome, ladies, back to the Donaldson File. Don't forget my book, America at the Abyss, Will Americans Survive? You can get that book at barnesandnoble.com. You can get it at amazon.com, and you can also get it at libertyhillpublishingpress.com. So you got plenty of opportunities to buy this book. It's a great book. It will answer many of the questions you have. And we've been about the future of American politics and where we can go, and also solutions to our problems. I'll even answer the question, how we survive. All right. Now back to I was saying. Now the other aspect comes into play, and now we're going to go into another aspect of the media, and I do detail this in my book, but because there are a lot of ways to fix an election that are legal, not the least of which keeping information from voters that could be decisive. Let me give you an example. There were numerous stories not really covered. The Abraham Accord, for example, during the third quarter of last year, we had a 33% increase in GDP growth. In other words, we were coming out of our self-induced economic downturn. So boom. So we saw, and so basically that wasn't covered. And certainly we know very clearly about, the Biden computer, in which basically many of the secrets of how the Bidens got their wealth, not the least of which many of the relationships that the Bidens had, as well as, Hunter Biden, ability to make extra money on the side, as we can say. Let's just say, the Biden secrets were laid bare on this computer. And that was a story. It was declared Russian misinformation, which was a lie. You had 51 former operatives of the CIA and intelligence lie to the American people on behalf of the Biden campaign. You had the media covering this up. You had social media that wouldn't even allow you to transform the story. For example, for several days, if I wanted to pass the story on to somebody else, hey, did you see this? They wouldn't let you do it. The New York Post was actually locked and couldn't do anything on Twitter, as an example. And so basically, and there was a survey done by Media Matters, in which when people were asked, hey, if you knew about the Abraham Accord, if you knew about the Hunter Biden laptop, if you knew about the increased growth or a couple other things that the media didn't cover, would you have still voted for Joe Biden? And there was enough votes, enough people, according to the survey, that would have changed their mind and not voted for Biden, enough votes that it could have changed the election results. So you can change an election by simply not covering certain stories. Organize yourself with the media, have the media basically say, we're not going to cover that story if it hurts our candidate that we want to see win. And we certainly saw that completely. That's one way you rig an election. You can rig an election. Go along with a little voter fraud, a little voter aspects. So what we saw was complete chaos in 2020. And we're still dealing with the fallout of that. And so it'll be interesting to see, what happens in 2022, if there'll be enough enough voter fraud to change an election anywhere. And I should also tell you, it's not just Democrats as well. In 2018, in the North Carolina 9th Congressional District, there were some issues dealing with voter fraud, namely ballot harvesting in nursing homes. And basically, and here's the interesting aspect comes into play, because there was a lot of numerical anomalies. John Lott, who's a pretty good researcher, does a lot of work on gun control, but he did some analysis and found that there were some numerical anomalies that he saw when it came down to voting. That it just didn't seem right, or this seemed to be out of the ordinary. In 2018, one individual was looking at the absentee ballots and noticed they were out of whack for Republicans, that this was a significantly high numbers that would have been normally reported by Republicans. That, again, it wasn't proof that there was voter fraud, but there was proof that something was amiss. And it turned to be exactly that. It was amiss. Now, we don't know for certain whether or not the Democrat actually won the election, because it's often hard to prove after the fact that somebody stole an election. But you certainly knew that there was enough evidence that election fraud occurred in enough of numbers to make a difference. And they ended up having to redo the election, period. And that was the Republican who probably got pretty well caught cheating. And I know, because I had a chance to talk to a good friend of mine who lives in North Carolina, and we got talking about this, and he said, I'm not going to disagree that something went amiss, because the person who was caught doing it had that reputation to begin with. The real question is, my friend said, why anybody would even bring him in part of the campaign. All right. So, yes. And now we did get a question. We did get a question from the border, from the border. Well, here's an interesting aspect. And I'm going to make a couple of things here, because sometimes concerned about the border. You should be concerned about the border, because essentially we had something like 2 million people come in the country in about 2021 illegally. We still have people coming in the country illegally in massive numbers. And the question that comes into play here is, what happens with these people? Because they essentially go to the underground. And we're talking numbers at equal or greater than the legal immigration we have coming into the country. So you have the situation we have, and the point I'm going to make here is that you can't have a country without a border. And it's hard to have a solid immigration policy when basically for every legal citizen, you may have one or two illegal coming across the border, and because it impacts a lot of different ways. I used to be a very big immigration supporter, open borders even, in the 1990s. But my view today has changed mainly because of two things. One, it's hard, as my wife would tell me, it is hard to support a policy where people come in the back door uninvited. And it's hard to have as she says, I don't mind them coming in the front door invited. I just don't want them sneaking in the back door. And I think that's a legitimate complaint that most Americans have. It's not that most Americans have. And they're looking at this saying, okay, we got a lot of people in this country illegally now. They're hiding in in many ways in the underground. They're not necessarily part of our society in general. And it's hard to have when about 5 to 7, 8% of your citizenship is here illegally. And we're talking millions of people, about 20 million people maybe. And so how do you assimilate those people? Because assimilation is the key to all of this, to a successful immigration policy. People come to America for these benefits of being an American. And we need to be understanding that assimilation into our culture is a necessity. Immigration, and this is what I wrote in support of immigration in 1994. Immigration without assimilation is national suicide. Are we committing national suicide? That's a legitimate question we have. And I think it's a question that cannot be, that cannot be just dismissed out of hand. So we should be concerned. One of the aspects of Trump is that he did put some element of control on the border. Now, he didn't make the big wall. We have walls in some places, but he certainly didn't wall off the entire south, border. But there was an effort to control immigration and reduce the number coming in the country illegally. There was that effort, and people at least understood that. And I think that it makes it easier for people to support immigration policies if they know that the laws are going to be enforced. If they're not going to be enforced, they turn against it. As it is, most polls that I've, including polls I've done, people no longer want more immigration. They want less immigration. They might tolerate immigration at its present level, but more and more, they're wanting less immigration. In other words, we're losing support for the policy because of this. And so, and certainly there's a lot of other, negative impact of it is, in the Donaldson files, we talk about the fact that the Chinese have been using the border to transport illegal fentanyl to encourage addiction among Americans. That was done by Robert Spalding in an article that he wrote recently, and based on his books. And so there's a lot of negative impact of coming. In other words, having a border is a necessity to having a country. And it's a necessity to have assimilation of those immigrants who come into this country legally to be assimilated into the greater society. Because assimilation, immigration without assimilation is national suicide. So now we got about 3 minutes left, and I want to, again, like I say, these are, points that people, brought to us. And now there was a question that came up, and I joke, I make the point that the unemployment numbers we're seeing, look, presidents take credit for when unemployment goes down, presidents take credit for it. Hey, look what I've done. And certainly we're now at about 3.6% unemployment. But I make the point repeatedly that this began in the Trump years. May of 2020, the recession officially came to an end, according to most economists. We had 1.5, an average of May to December of 2020, 1.5 million jobs returned. I'm going to use the word returned. Because remember, we basically closed the economy down in March and April, and 20 million people went out of work almost immediately. And so basically, we returned about 55, 60% of those people came back into the workforce in the 7 months with an average of about 1.5 million. The unemployment went from 14.4% down to 6.7%. So they more than half. And it should have been even lower had states like California and New York opened their economy very similar to what Florida, Texas, and Georgia was doing. So you have that. And so I make the point very clearly. The present unemployment started in the Trump era. But not only that, let's look at the other numbers. And these are, again, it's in my book. I detail this in my book using data, including data from the Department of Labor, on a month-by-month basis that we followed as the foundation. Will Riley also was involved in one of the research projects. And quite frankly, the bottom line is Republicans did a much better job of reducing in their states. And they've been consistently under the national average compared to Democrats. There's a difference of 1,000 per 100,000. In other words, this is a Republican-led recovery. The only news will be, will the inflation derail this recovery? That will be the question. This is Tom Donaldson saying goodnight from the Resistance Hour here on the Batchelor News Radio Network. You can listen to this show every day, 1 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.